Welcome to the Esport Research Report. I'm Dr. Brian McCauley here in the city of Jönköping, where we're going to have our conference this November. This is the third talk from our excellent summer panel series run by our Graduate Student Committee members, Evelyn Tan, Bo Yu, and Ivan Bonilla. And the last of these talks is about a new era of high performance, which features Dr. Laura Swettenham, sport and exercise psychologist with the International Federation of Esport Coaches, who will be at the conference, Pablo Lopez, who is a strength and conditioning coach specializing in esports, and Dr. Jordan Tsai, freelance physiotherapist, works for Cloud9, Evil Geniuses, 100 Thieves, and much more for the last 4 or 5 years. So enjoy this talk from our summer series on high performance, and hopefully, maybe if I'm lucky, we'll get to see you at the conference in November.
Be telling us about the ins and outs of high performance in some of the top organizations today. I am supported by my wonderful colleagues Ivan and Bo, who are in the background, and they are making sure that they can take your questions. And if you have anything that pops up as our conversation goes on, please feel free to put that in the chat. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel. Actually, they're going to introduce themselves. We'll start with Jordan. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are today.
Sure. My name is Dr. Jordan Tsai. I'm a physical therapist and a board-certified orthopedic clinical specialist. I've been working in professional esports for the last 3 to 4 years. Started with Cloud9, who I still work with currently, and Evil Geniuses. I currently work with mostly LCS, professional League of Legends players, but I have worked in the past and kind of still occasionally with basically athletes from every game. So Valorant, CSGO, Fortnite, World of Warcraft, and so mostly PC gamers. But yeah, I'm really interested in developing the health and wellness of the space and making sure that players can continue to play as long as possible.
Great. Thank you so much. And we'll move on to Laura.
Hi. Yes, I'm Laura. I'm a sport and exercise psychologist, and I've been working in esports for the last probably 2 to 3 years. So doing applied work with teams, mostly League of Legends teams. I kind of moved into esports from traditional sport, about 2-3 years ago, where I was working quite a lot with professional academy footballers, as well as tennis players. Now I work for the International Federation of Esports Coaches, where we really pioneer the work with support staff, with coaching staff, in order to try and support high performance.
Great. And Pablo, tell us about
Hello, my name
yourself.
is Pablo. I'm a student and conditioning coach at Real Madrid Junior. I started working at Real Madrid 2 years ago. In the first year, we won the European Championship, and that's why they renewed me for the second year. In the second year, I decided to move to esports. That's why I started moving to strength and conditioning in esports. And we entered Infinity. That was one of the teams from LLA who went to the Worlds. Now I'm just waiting for September, so for some things new to do. I'm ambitious, yeah.
Great. This is really interesting. I just noticed that all three of you sort of have a background in more traditional sport and are now working within esports. And that's really cool. We'll definitely cover one of these questions on some of the similarities and differences between that later. But let's just start with, what does high performance mean today? Anyone can take the floor.
I'm happy to shoot first if you want.
Yeah, sure.
So I think for me, the difference today is that the well-being is such a big factor in it now. I think, everyone is very aware that it isn't just performance and giving 100% all the time. It's actually a really fine balance between well-being and performance. So in sports psychology, we talk a lot about the kind of challenge and support balance. So making sure that we know, say, when our players need that extra support, but actually when do they want to be pushed more? When can they be challenged to then get the most out of them? So I think, it's that slight switch to recognizing the well-being element, but finding that balance and knowing your team well enough that you know when to put your foot on the gas or when to pull off.
Okay.
Yeah, I think of high performance at a really basic level of what is the capacity every player has, and then what is the capacity of the team as a sum of all players, and then how do we get them as close to that as possible. So, not every player will hit their peak, and not every team will hit its peak. And so I think our role and a lot of the support staff's role is to put systems in place, help players individually, try to create a methodology in a very short amount of time to get them to peak at the right time. And then hopefully everything comes together and you start winning championships. But it's an evolving process. We don't know everything about it. And obviously the variables change every split, every season, week to week, even things happen. So it's really exciting to be able to work in the field because it's always evolving. And I feel like there's just always room for creativity and for theory crafting and, application, and then hopefully results come with it.
What we can talk about high performance about the team is a team that needs to obtain results. Okay, so to obtain results, we have to develop the skills that the players and the team has, and the I don't know how to say the rest. The exercise is not about only the game. Okay, it's all about what is about all the things that are in the house, for example, or in the gaming house. It's not how many hours do I play League of Legends or do I play Counter-Strike. It's how many hours I sleep, how many what I eat, when do I stretch. All of this is involved on obtaining results and high performance.
Okay, so it's definitely different. I guess the clear message is it's not about just grinding anymore or like pure skill. There's a sort of complex range of factors surrounding high performance. What would you say are some of the top factors that organizations focus on today? So when you're talking about mental health, what does that mean? Or if you're talking about factors outside of just grinding? Yes, go ahead.
No. I'm just letting if someone.
I'll jump in. So I think, like I mentioned before, it's very individualized. So different players respond to different stimuli. You might have a player who is naturally more inclined to grind, and if you take that away from them, like you cannot grind, a lot of times their performance suffers because they feel like they're not putting in the effort they're typically used to putting in, and they don't feel like they're practicing the way they want to. It makes it harder for them to actually continue to push. On the other hand, there are players also who like to work on their improvement in other ways, like VOD reviews, more analytical assessment of their play, that kind of thing, getting more coaching directly. And if you force those players to just grind instead of, learning in their own way, that also can cause burnout. It can lead to feelings of frustration. So I think that when we try to maximize performance in players, it's very, very unique to each person. And the hard part for us is, as teams trade players, we might get introduced to a new player and have to learn how to train them and how to work with them within a few weeks and hopefully get them ready, if not shorter, right? Even right now in LCS, there's some chaos going around with roster switches in the middle of the split. And these teams are going to have to integrate these players and get them basically ready to not only compete within a week, but then to compete at a high enough level to hopefully make playoffs in the next 4 to 5 weeks. So it's a really, really challenging task. And I don't envy the teams that are dealing with that right now.
Laura, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess something that sprung to mind was really understanding the person kind of behind the performer. So like kind of Jordan saying here, really getting to understand, I guess, what works for somebody, will not work for somebody else. So actually understanding what makes them tick, what do they need to allow them to perform at their best? Do they need that extra bit of time off? Do they just want to grind? Like what is it? So I think, yeah, definitely spending that time to build the relationship, to understand the person, I think will, really pay off in the end when we are speaking about being able to find that balance between the well-being and the performance.
Okay, so what are, at the individual level then, what are some of the challenges or barriers to high performance that players face?
Like probably one of them is the lack of confidence and willpower. Like, when you are with a League of Legends player, he thinks that it's only about playing League of Legends for 4, 5, or 6 hours. But for reach the peak performance, we have to talk about all other things that are not involved in the League of Legends. We are talking about bots. We are talking about the coaching staff. We are talking about the nutritionist. We are talking about the physical therapist. We are involving a lot of things that need the League of Legends player to reach the peak, right? Is that why League of Legends, the willpower is, I don't like it. I prefer the sports traditional players because of that, because they came to train and they do what they need to do. When you go with a League of Legends players, is, I don't know how to say it good, but it's like awful to see that normally League of Legends players don't like to do exercise, for sure. Just like 10 minutes or 20 minutes of exercise that will improve his core, his proprioception, he will increase the mobility, little few things that will improve his performance, right? Only 20 minutes or 30 minutes a day will improve his performance a lot. So willpower and lack of confidence, for sure.
I just want to segue into that. Do you think there's an element of maybe age that plays into why League of Legends players compared to like traditional players have less willpower? I think this question is directed to Pablo.
I don't think so. Is the age, right? I have players from 12 to 17 along the year. I have players from 12 to 17, and normally the League of Legends players that I have are 20, 22. Like, it's not about power. It's about we have to I don't know what to say, to involve what is the performance, what is the exercise to the esports, right? Because they see there is no research about why strength and cardio workout is improving the performance of esports players, right? So we need that in this moment, because if not, the League of Legends players will continue just drinking caffeine and sugar. They will continue resting just 3 hours. They will continue just sitting on the chair like for 10 hours. And that's not good. That's not good.
Yeah, I would say that you're absolutely right. The barriers in my mind to performance are oftentimes the mentality that players have and the beliefs that they have. And it's not entirely due to them just being a gamer, although I think that's an easy attribute. I have noticed differences between players of different games, especially at the pro level, and how they approach performance and how they approach physical health. I think one of the biggest barriers to performance in League of Legends specifically is the fact that the game is set up so you are always in a solo queue environment when you're coming up. You don't get to pro by playing on teams traditionally until you're already a challenger level player, GM plus, high elo. So basically the 99% of the time that these players have spent in game have been by themselves and learning how to improve on their own. And what that does though, inevitably, is it leads to really bad habits. It leads to things like, oh, the only way I can climb is by not working with my team, playing for myself, playing greedy, grinding hours. And then it's really hard when we get new players, especially rookies on teams, to break them of that habit. Like, look, we need to put you on a champion that you don't want to play, and you're going to have to play it on an island, and you're not going to get any resources. They don't like to play like that, So it's oftentimes that wears on the mental, because they feel like they have no agency in the game. They feel like I'm not contributing to winning, and then that leads to burnout. You're right. They don't tend to exercise very much, and I don't know what the relationship is between certain games and that, but like for CSGO players, what I've noticed is a much higher percentage of competitive CSGO players and Call of Duty players actually take fitness very seriously, and they work out all the time. I wouldn't say it's a majority, but it's definitely a higher percentage than most of the League of Legends players I've worked with. So maybe it's a cultural thing. Maybe it's, certain games have certain styles or personalities of people that get into them. And you might see, especially like Call of Duty, it's much bigger in the US. There's a higher percentage of those players who also play traditional sports. And so I think there's some overlap between games and between backgrounds and lifestyles, that kind of thing.
And I think something we can potentially think about it here is, like, I guess, behavior change and behavior change models, and actually how might we apply some of these theories if we are working with a player who just does not want to speak to you about their mental, or does not want to put the work in at the gym or whatever it might be. So I suppose things like self-determination theory, if we're just looking at autonomy, competence, and relatedness, and maybe we're trying to think about whether they're being fulfilled for the individual player or not, if they have a real understanding of, like you were saying, Pablo, do they understand what they're doing and why they're doing it? Potentially not, because the research isn't there. But are there conversations that we can have with them to try and help them to change their readiness, I suppose, to change? And of course, it's not an easy task at all. But yeah, perhaps just a thought about how we might start to approach some of those players who are struggling to change.
Yeah.
So what has worked when it comes to helping players break these bad solo queue habits, solo queue mindset, if you will?
Yeah, that's a good question. I again, I hate to say, but it depends. It depends on the player. I think it really depends on good scouting. And I think more teams need to invest time and energy into recruiting the right players, making sure that the players they're bringing in already have the right mindset to be able to develop. But then also, obviously, on the other side is success. Once players see, like, hey, if I buy into the system and I can start seeing the results, I am improving, our team is doing well, it becomes easier and easier to adopt new things. I think EG, this split has, like the last split, was kind of the best example I can think of in recent history of bringing 2 rookies in, one straight from amateur, so no academy experience, and having them perform really, really well and integrate directly into a team with a bunch of veterans, including international player who came over from Europe. Like, it was a very large mix of personalities and player types, but everybody bought in. And I think that was the thing that we established very early on, was our culture has to be one of teamwork. It has to be one of appreciating the person next to you and not trying to be the hero in every situation.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so then what are the main barriers to high performance at the team level? So obviously we always talk about trying to get a good team culture, but we all know that it's not very easy. What are some of the things that's stopping orgs from getting there?
Well, I mean, since I followed with that, I'll follow up on that. So a lot of the barriers that we had initially were tied into some of the issues that I just brought up, where communication was a problem a little bit. Players' communication styles need to be adopted, and also respect. Having players who don't know each other, even to an extreme, even might have played against each other frequently on the ladder and don't like each other very much. They might have inted someone or in a game, or you never know. But having them overcome that kind of stuff, the idea that you are not in solo queue anymore, you're not playing the game just to climb anymore, you're trying to integrate into the team. Once you can overcome that stuff, it becomes much easier. But I'd say that number one is communication, and then also communication top down from the coaches to the players, making sure that coaches understand how to coach their players, and then also that players respect their coaches enough to listen to them. That's also really challenging, because most coaches are not as high level as the players. And in this specific game, it's a very quantifiable metric of how good you are. Like, hey, you're 1,000 LP under me, you're not as good as me, but I have to listen to what you say because you're the coach, right? And that's a difficult barrier for some players to get over.
Yeah, he talks about okay, if you want to.
Oh, you go.
Okay, yeah, you talk about communication. It's like more like group cohesion. Like, we need not only the players to play together, to communicate together. It's about just getting along together out of the game, just looking for activities for them to do. Like, I don't know what to say, like playing football is a really good skill, a really good ability to do with them, just to do group cohesion and them to communicate, to develop some skills, some social skills. We need to search that, because when it all goes bad, they blame each other, right? It's not only in sports, it's in traditional sports. When it all goes bad, nobody has the fault. Like, it's the top laner's fault that we give him resources and he can do anything, right? Not what we need to do is to all of them get along together and just improve together. That's what we need to focus on.
Yeah, and I guess following on from that, just around feeling comfortable to speak up, like the communication part, I guess, but feeling comfortable to share the really tough stuff, So actually, do I trust that if I share my opinion that I'm not going to be judged or I'm not going to be told off or whatever it might be? So is there that psychological safety within the environment where, yeah, I feel comfortable I can share anything with the coach or with the other players? And something that can help to build that is just kind of adding in points of time where the players and the staff can be more vulnerable and will kind of share their vulnerabilities with one another. And it can be a really challenging thing to do. And you have got to make sure everybody's on board and is happy to share. But yeah, it might be like, let's share our challenges that we've faced in the last few years, or why are we all here? What do we all care about? Can we kind of find a common interest, if you like, where we can all connect and we can all kind of start working on that shared mission almost, so that when things do get really tough, we can remember that there, is a human underneath all of that potentially toxic stuff that might be going on the surface.
And so whose responsibility is it to build this kind of culture?
Everyone's.
Yeah.
Everyone's, okay. Because I think sometimes players go in thinking like this is the job of the team manager or the job of the coach or the job of the in-game leader. But yeah, I think it's totally right. That
I think it definitely depends, obviously, on the structure you have within your team.
Yeah.
So often what I've seen is often the coach will lead it. Sometimes the sports psych might lead it. But what you then potentially want to do, so let's say the coach is the person who's pushing it initially. Do you want to then try and find other people to kind of bring under your wing to be almost like the cultural architect sort of thing? So they're also spreading the message. So it might be like a team captain or something who is maybe, let's say, pulling up somebody if they are on working in line with the team values, for example, so that people are pulling each other up and it's not just coach telling us off all the time because I haven't done something I meant to. So I think, yeah, it can look very different, but I think you need that leader to start with, but I think definitely then spreading it out and getting other people to take the lead. And hopefully eventually everybody then just comes on board and starts working in line with those values, that culture, and so on.
Yeah. Was that Jordan, was that how it was at EG with the recent LCS split?
I agree, Laura. So it's on everyone to create the culture, but the way that everyone creates that culture is different, unique to their position and role, right? So it's kind of on the performance staff to set the precedent and set the standard for what the culture should be, to enable players and coaches to, I guess, create that culture on their own without really realizing it. I think that's something that we do a lot, is we put situations in place. We have activities for them. We try to create meaningful interactions between players and coaches that are sort of guided so that they're starting to build that culture without consciously having to think about it. It's really easy to say, oh, I want you all to act as a team, but to really get them to believe that and to actually perform the actions and the behaviors necessary to make that happen, it's really difficult, right? So what we try to do is, a lot of analyzation. We look at what players on the team are already natural leaders and are capable of stepping into that role, and we try to bring that out of them. We talk to them like, hey, I know you're kind of upset with this one other player. Why don't you try mentoring them? Or why don't you try talking to them one-on-one, not in the middle of the scrim? Things like that, where we try to show them what leadership style we want or what kind of behaviors we want. And then they are the ones who take on the role of doing that. So I would say that EG is a good example of it because I'm more heavily involved in the performance side with them, but every team does this to some level. And just because certain teams haven't had the same level of success in a short amount of time doesn't mean that they're not doing it correctly. Like I said, it's a very, very complex process. And sometimes all the variables come together and you do really well. And sometimes you struggle because you have all the pieces, you have the processes that should work a certain way, but for one reason or another, you fall slightly short. And at this level of competition, especially in LCS where it's best of ones, one mistake, one little change, one bad week, it really, really can screw up your entire season, it feels like. So there's a lot of pressure, and a lot of players, especially, we didn't talk about this earlier, but a lot of players, because they come up not playing traditional sports, not playing in competitive leagues, if they're not used to that pressure, it's really hard to know how you're going to react. For a lot of these players, I mean, I'll be honest, when EG won the LCS title last split, when halfway through the split, our goal was not really to win the split. It was to make playoffs. It was not an expectation, I should say, to win the split. But because we were honest with ourselves, we had two rookies. We had two players who was the first time playing on that big a stage. We're like, playoffs comes around, we're like, okay, let's just do our best to continue improving. That's the focus. And then it went really, really well. I don't think anyone could have expected us to go undefeated essentially after the first game. But a lot of these other teams, they're so close to being at that level all the time that it really just is who had a better day that day, and it could be very, very close.
Yeah, and but I know that your LCS team from last split had quite a relatively large support staff than what you usually see. I think there were like 5 or 6 support staff, right? So what can orgs who don't have the luxury of that level of support staff, what can they do to up their performance?
I would say that there's just a list of priority, right? So highest priority to lowest priority, in my opinion, and this is at the cost of my own job, maybe, I'd say the highest priority is probably the mental performance, because we know that esports at the base of it is a mental game. It's 90% decision making. Playing the game correctly, playing the game well is going to determine most of the victories. At the secondary level, I would say would be physical performance. So having a physical therapist on staff is great, but at a bare minimum, having a very competent trainer, having someone who can take these players through appropriate workouts to build up their cardiovascular endurance, their muscular strength, their postural muscles, teach them good habits. Most of the players that I would say that 99% of players that I work with don't have injuries. What they have are overuse issues. So they, you change some of their habits, you show them a few ways to stretch, you show them recovery techniques, and they're going to be fine. I very rarely actually have to work with a player for a true injury, like a nerve compression or something like that. So I would say that prevention is it's way more important than rehab. You don't want to get to the point of rehab. That's actually my role with all these teams, is I don't want players to even get to the point where they truly need me to be a physical therapist. Most of the time I'm working more as ergonomics expert, or like, like a trainer, essentially. I'm showing them how to do things that are preventative. And then from there, it's again, this is my opinion. The next step would be like nutrition and all that stuff. Because although that stuff is really important, if I were to put it on a priority schedule, that is not going to win or lose them games on itself, right? By itself. What they're eating is not going to make a big enough difference in how they perform compared to their sleep, their physical health, and their mental performance. Like, those other things are much higher priority, in my opinion. So if a team is looking at running a minimal staff, much like in every other aspect of esports, people have to wear multiple hats. A lot of people have to overlap. So if you can find someone who is highly qualified in performance psychology and also just happens to be a personal trainer, like, you can kind of fit those two things together. They might be able to give basic nutritional advice. And so I think that for teams that are trying to save money and be as efficient as possible, finding individuals like that is going to go a really long way in helping your team get to the next level. But what you can't do is, because we can't afford the whole staff, we're not going to have any of it. We're just going to have our coaches tell them all this stuff. That I think is just not really conducive to long-term performance at all.
And Pablo, you're the both, aren't you? You're like a strength conditioning coach and you're a performance coach at this point. What do you think?
I just want to talk that if it's not good not having any one of the staff just doing the performance role, okay? But if the organization doesn't have the money to take involved on that, I just say that the coach, for example, or the general manager, has to do routines. Like, just get the players into daily routines of objectives, rest, nothing more, because they can do nothing more. A general manager or a coach that has not strength and conditioning or any studies related to science can do any of personal training or that. So the focus will be about daily routines, just getting the player to get up early, to eat good, don't drink 3 monsters a day, right? Just the basic things that to stay healthy, right? Not just high performance, just to stay healthy.
Yeah, Laura?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think for those people who maybe do hold, dual roles or more than that, it's then recognizing when something might shift outside of a certain competency. So when might something indicate, say for myself as a sports psychologist, I'm always thinking, is this more of a clinical or more of a mental health issue that actually I'm not competent to work with? So if you are working in one of those roles, considering that and understanding what your boundaries might be, I suppose, and having contacts that you might be able to reach out to if you do need to refer somebody for extra help or support. And I think just one other thing that I think is really useful that we can all do, and I think all the top teams do, is just reflecting, making sure that you're taking that time once a week or more than that to sit down either on your own or as a team and just really reflect and see where you're at and really have an action plan moving forward. And I think that open sharing of communication again is really helping. I think it helps the culture. I think it helps the psychological safety side of things. So I would, for those teams who maybe can't afford any kind of extra support staff, making sure those reflective sessions, those discussions are built in regularly so everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, actually, I kind of had a question for Laura. None of the teams I've worked with have a dedicated therapist.
Yeah.
And so I think we highlight mental performance a lot. We very rarely highlight mental wellness. So is that something that you've seen orgs actually have available? Because I don't think we've ever seen it.
No, I've never seen anyone have a clinical psychologist on board. In traditional sport, yes. That tends to be reasonably common now. Not always, unfortunately, but it is more so. So in my position, what we try to do is build a mental health referral pathway so that we have certain decision-making processes that we will go through, and we will bring clinical psychologists in and kind of have a discussion, say, about a certain player, so that we can start to assess whether I'm okay to continue working with the player, or if we need to team up and they have some clinical support and some sports psych support, whatever kind of might work best for the player. Sometimes you do find that the player doesn't want to go see a clinical psychologist. And then if, say, I have a good relationship with that player, then I might work through the clinical psychologist and try and support the player in that way. Because I think it is important that interplay, that communication is happening, because sometimes what can happen is if we take a player out of, the environment that is causing all of the stress and the mental ill health, kind of fix them and then drop them back into it again without any of that support, then it can be really difficult. So working in collaboration with them is really useful, but it's definitely something that I think is really needed in esports, to have people on board. I think I've seen cases of ill mental health, I wouldn't say more in esports, but at least just as much in traditional sports. So I think it's something that we need to be really mindful of, and having those processes, having those contacts at least to reach out to is a good start.
No, I totally think you're in line. It's not just esports; it's the gaming community as a whole has a mental health problem. The higher, there's the percentage of gamers I've seen with mental health issues are significantly higher than I think than the typical population. If anyone out there is doing this stuff, it's definitely needed.
I just have a question for Jordan. As a physical therapist, have you seen a lot of core injuries, like abdominal? Have you seen a lot?
Not so much core injuries. I've seen a higher percentage of back pain now. And this is actually the secondary effect of a lot of teams now having trainers.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're bad. It's just that a lot of these individuals, a lot of these players are not used to working out. And so now that they're starting to run, they're starting to deadlift, they're starting to work out. I'm actually seeing a lot of players for more sports related injuries now. I see guys who are like, hey, my knee hurts when I squat. I'm like, okay, well, that's not gaming related, but you know, it's a more common thing. I think it's a good thing, right? Overall, it's better that they're having these sorts of injuries because they're doing stuff to improve their health.
Yeah, because I'm not sitting on the
exactly.
Exactly.
So I'm actually sort of happy to see that side of it more. Is like, okay, you tried to bench press and now your shoulder hurts. That affects how you play. That's not good, but the overall trade-off is good. That okay, you're exercising. We can resolve this stuff, you know, on our own, and then hopefully it doesn't affect your play. But I'd rather have that than teams thinking, oh, I don't want to injure my player, so I don't want them to do anything. Like that's much more.
That happens, right?
Yes, yeah, it's much more detrimental, and I'd rather, you know, that we change that culture.
Okay, yeah, because I saw a research about the risk of the esports players that they sit down for 8 hours and they have core problems. So you have to do core workout to prevent these injuries.
Yeah. I would say that back pain, typically in my experience, in my practice, is mostly treated with core strengthening anyway. So yeah, anytime a player has back pain, even neck pain, we look at how does the core muscle, how does this stability affect the back? How does it affect their posture? Really poor core strength can lead to worse posture, which then contributes to shoulder, neck pain, even wrist pain. Like it's all tied together.
It's essential. Core is essential for these players.
Okay. That was actually really insightful. I didn't know all those things. So thanks for sharing. But I think we can take about maybe one or two questions and then we open the floor to the audience. Okay. So what do organizations look for? Sorry, when recruiting a new player, what would you say the organizations look for?
Oh,
beyond skill.
That's a hard question because it depends. I mean, and talking with actually, I made a tweet thread about this where I asked a bunch of sports psychologists in the esports world what they would advise rookies and new players to try to develop on their way to pro. And almost consistently, the number one thing is coachability. You have to have a player who's willing to put their ego aside in order to learn, because as much as we all want to be the rookie coming in and just stomping on everybody and being a superstar from day one, it's such a rare thing to see. Most likely you come in and you really struggle. You're going against people who have literally won world championships, multiple domestic titles. They're going to crush you with stuff you haven't seen before. And even if you played them in solo queue, right? And you've beaten Bjergsen in solo queue, he's now playing with a team that he practices with every day. It's a very, very different field. They're going to play around these players, and so I think coachability and having the lack of ego enough to say, I am not good enough yet. I will be great one day, but I will continue to develop. You have to put yourself in that position first. And a lot of the players, they struggle with this because they're coming from being the very, very best in 90% of their games to now being one of the worst out of those 10, and it's hard to deal with that. It's a mental thing. It's very shocking to the ego.
Yeah. Laura, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree. Coachability for sure, and communication skills, listening skills, all of those sorts of things. And I think, I think most people would say that they prefer to have a player that was moldable and that you could fit into your team and that people can get along with, and that isn't being toxic in the environment, rather than having, the best player in the world, but they're just, causing a really challenging environment for everybody. So I think if we go back to what we were talking about before, kind of around culture, around building, I suppose, like team cohesion and things, I think that's why that coachability is so important, so that you can have somebody who, will take on that sort of, to take on the role that the culture needs them to, I suppose.
And Pablo?
No, nothing to say. It's about coachability.
I do want to add one other thing. So we talk about like new players in this discussion, but I do think that when I said it depends, it also depends on what the team needs, because like some of the teams I've worked with, like what they were looking for is actually a veteran who is competent at coaching and developing younger players. And that might be what their team needs, especially in the academy level. I think of a lot of really successful academy teams now, what they look for is building a roster of aspiring young talent, veterans who can guide them.
And two amateurs,
yeah, very, very stable players. You have to think about the team environment. What is the goal of this team? And it can't all be superstar aspiring hotshots, right? If you have 5 of those, it's going to be a mess. All right. It's just going to be everybody.
Right?
Yeah. You could have a superstar roster. And the other thing is, like, we've seen these super teams fail horribly because you have, let's pick the best player from every region in their role, and we put them on one team. They will not work together a lot of times. They will struggle. They will struggle. There's too much ego. There's too much, I am the carry traditionally. And so it's really hard to build a team around that. I think the teams that work the best are when every role is clearly established and players believe that they can perform that role to the best of their ability. And then the coaches know how to use those players to the best of their ability, right? If you have a really, really strong bot lane and your coach starts drafting a weak bot draft, you're not going to do well, right? You got to play to your strengths. You also have to understand the players as individuals. You need to understand how they're going to interact with each other. Some players don't like to be on an island, and if you put them there consistently, they're going to not only struggle because they're not used to the matchup, but they're going to start struggling because they're going to keep performing below where they think they should. And that starts to affect confidence. So I think it's really complex, actually. And when you talk about building teams, this is where a lot of teams struggle, because a lot of fans, I'm a fan, when I see a team roster come out, my first impression is, okay, well, who are these players? How did they do on their other teams? But then you think, how do they work together? And it's similar in traditional sports. When the Lakers put, Westbrook on
James,
the team,
Westbrook,
LeBron, I was like, all of these players want the ball.
To win,
There's only one ball. You can't all shoot it. So you on paper, even you look at that, and you're like, that's not going to work well. No. And in esports, I don't think we're at that point yet where teams really understand that well. So I would say that there needs to be more thought process in developing systems for recruitment, and then how to put teams together versus just how do we recruit the best players available.
So an area we haven't really touched on so far is like the ever-changing rosters, right? If we know that rosters are going to change, how does that affect how an organization builds, a high-performing team, or get players to buy into the culture if they know I can be out whenever?
It's hard to be a performance coach in the esports world, because in 1 week you can have 2 new players, and all the work that you have done with the whole team as a cohesion group, cohesion work or something like that, it all goes out. So you miss all the, for example, precision work that you have done in the first year. It's all missed, right? So it has to focus like week by week. You have to talk with the players. You have to be in touch with them and know what they want. Because it is not about getting the objectives that you want. It's about getting the objectives that the jungle want, the CSGO player wants. So it's going week by week and just searching the best for the team.
Yeah. I think having a good system in place also for academy to develop similar systems to LCS or to the Premier League essentially is really important, because then you can use your academy team to, one, scout new players that are going to come up, and you already know them intimately. The coaches know them. They know your system. They know how the team wants to play. They already know the players they're going to be playing with. That's really, really important for good integration. And I think that's the way of the future. And I think certain teams are doing that really well right now. The two I work with, Cloud9 EG, both have very strong academy teams. And the goal is always to promote at least one of those players to the main team. And then if the other team, if the other players are solid, you could also then, I hate to make it sound like a business, but it is, right? You sell those to other teams, and that helps you accrue capital to buy imports or much more expensive veterans that you can plug into the main team as well. So the team building dynamic right now is really complex, but in the end, it has to be that you're finding players that already know your system, and then that makes it easier to drop in. If you make like what I really dislike right now is a lot of teams are putting together random rosters every single split. And you're not giving your performance staff any time to actually develop that roster to its full potential. So before it even hits its potential, you're scrapping it and you're starting over. And so the teams that do that, I think historically what you see is this like peak valley. They always do much better by the summer split and they maybe make playoffs, they do okay, and then they sell half of the roster and they try it again. And it's like, oh, well, that roster wasn't good enough to win, so we need a new roster. But what that shows is, okay, your staff is doing their absolute best to get these players to where they need to be, and you've just given them too short of a window potentially. And that's really, really hard. And it's frustrating as a staff to see your players replaced like that. And I understand there's contract issues, there's cost issues, but as a whole, I think more orgs do need to think about investing long-term and thinking about, we're not trying to win a championship this year, unless you are, right? If you have a superstar team, you are trying to win a championship this year. But if you're not, if you're doing a developmental roster, you need to give them
for long. Yeah,
it's not 1 year, it's 2 to 3 years. And I think in traditional sports, we see that all the time.
Yeah.
They have players that they are grooming from, for 3-4 years. And then they're like, okay, now we're ready to turn this player into a superstar. And we just don't have the patience for that right now.
There's a huge difference between esports and sports traditional. Like the normal players that are in sport traditional, like they have been growing together for 6-7 years. Like they didn't change the team. So the development, the improving of the team is huge, more than Valorant roster that change twice a year, right?
I think that's one of the main, shocks perhaps is a word when I moved into esports, was that it was so changeable. But also, say for example, as a sports, like often we're told that we should go into an environment and not really do anything for like 3 months and really just get to know what's going on. But in esports, it's like you're in there straight away. You've got to get going. You've got to get moving. But then you're doing that and things are changing just as fast as you're implementing things. And I think it is definitely, that argument of, I guess, sustainability. How are we creating a more sustainable space in esports for players, for teams, for coaches as well, where they are being given that opportunity and recognizing what are the goals at this point. So I totally agree with everything you guys have said.
Okay, we're gonna try and open to the floor now. We've got about 15 minutes. That was really great. We have a question here about research, I guess maybe more for Laura, I suppose. It says, it sounds like we're at the beginning of bringing in a science of esports performance. What are the limits of science as applied to esports? Where does it struggle? And how can we ensure symbiosis between esports as science/art?
Yeah, so we're at the beginning for sure. I'm very new in esports research. I've been doing it for longer in traditional sports. But certainly, and I think just like we see in a lot of other fields, is that the research does not necessarily translate into applied practice or into the esports team. So even though it might be giving us some fantastic information, it might be literally like at a gold standard. So I think there is a lot to be said about bringing out more case studies from professional teams about how they work and what they found successful, what hasn't worked, how they build their structures and so on. So I think case studies moving forward is going to be hopefully a really important part for the applied sense of things. But I think we see more stuff coming out, every day. It's really got a buzz going around it in the esports research. And I think an area for me, and maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I think we definitely need more in is with esports coaches. I think recognizing the esports coach as a performer, and getting more research on how they build relationships, how they work within an environment, what is their role. Things as simple as that actually aren't out there, or are out there in the very low numbers. So it's an exciting space at the moment for sure.
That's actually super interesting about like how we do have a lack of research on esports coaches and how they do what they do.
I think the hardest thing I've seen, because in trying to do lit reviews and trying to find applicable research, is we don't have good metrics for measuring performance in esports. Because one, game dependency. Even in League of Legends, I've worked with a lot of teams that have data science teams that struggle with, how do you quantifiably measure performance? What is good? What is bad? If a player dies 10 times, is that bad? Maybe, right? We traditionally would say, yes, it's bad, but what if they died? Every single time they died, they got their team a triple kill or an objective. Now those deaths aren't so bad, and it's like they enabled things to happen. What if a player doesn't encounter an enemy at all, but took every single turret, took all the minions, killed the next? Like, it's so hard to quantify what is actually good and what is bad in game that it makes research really, really difficult because you don't have metrics to judge, performance essentially. So I think before we even talk about is good research available to measure team success, coach success, all that stuff, we have to measure what is success. And until that's established, it becomes very, very difficult to have meaningful research. So right now, a lot of the research that I use and apply in terms of performance is secondarily applied, meaning, we know that reflexes, cognitive speed, mental testing, this stuff improves with more cardiovascular exercise, for example. Memory improves. But these are also tests that are not directly in game. So we're hoping that we're hoping it translates. So if your brain is working better in all these other tasks, it should also follow that it works better in game. We don't actually know if that's true or not. It's the same way, like if we were to say, if we tested a player's ability to kick a ball really, really hard, run really, really fast, jump super high, and had good agility, does it mean they're good at soccer? I can't really say that, like we'd assume they would be better than someone who's bad at all those things, but they might also just not know how to play football or soccer. And so they're going to be terrible at it. I had to throw football in there for you. I knew I saw that, like, oh, you called it soccer. But it's like that's the barrier that we have right now in gaming and in esports. We don't have good measurements, and it's really, really I guess ineffective, not so much the right word, but it's not fair to go off of results as a measure of performance, because results-based analysis is always very murky. Win-loss really does not mean that much. If how many games have you seen where one team looks 100 times better, but then they lose because of a mistake at the end? Are they a worse team? No, like things happen, but it's very, very difficult right now to have any sort of numbers that apply any meaning to like results or performance.
Okay, and our next question is, what areas would you focus on during the season versus off season?
In which term? Physical, nutrition?
It says whether physically, mentally, communication, nutrition.
When we talk about nutrition, it's going all the same for the year. Like you have to get along with the diet, with what to eat. So it's for all the year the same, I think. Like you cannot
nutrition
change
is long term.
Long term. And then when we talk about physically, it's week by week. Like you have to see how your players are, the matches they have lost, their physical and mental health. Because it's so important that if they don't want to do exercise, don't say them to do it, because it is going to be worse. Right? If we talk about an esports player that doesn't want to do any exercise, you can you can tell him to do it. You have to tell him why doing cardiovascular proprioception, some exercise is going to improve him. Not to say, okay, do it because you have to do it. You have to tell him why you are doing that. So in terms of physical, it doesn't change from off season to during the season. It changes week by week. You cannot say, okay, I'm doing this, I'm going to work heat, I'm going to for the preseason, and then during the season I'm going to work strength. You can't do that, because you have to change week by week.
Yeah, I agree with Pablo in that's probably the way it is. I wish, and this is something I've told a lot of players who are more interested in getting fit, that I told them what I would like to see is in off season, you train hard. Right. In traditional sports, that's what happens. You don't train as hard in season because you need your body to stay fresh. You need to recover and all that. In off season is when you grind. And so I would like to see that shifted more, where in off season players are really hitting weightlifting hard. They're really hitting cardio hard. They're getting their body in as good of physical shape as possible and actually playing a little bit less. And then when they get into regular season, you flip it. That would be the ideal model in my mind. Because it's really hard to convince people to do that. A few players I know that I've worked with for longer, they've adopted that themselves because they view this as their career, and they say, I want to do whatever. I've had players come up to me and say, I will do whatever it takes to be the best that I can be. What do you think? And if you have that mentality and you truly believe that, you're willing
It's
to
easy,
change everything. You're willing to change your whole life. You're never used to working out. All right, I'm going to start working out all the time. You're not used to VOD reviewing your games. I'm going to start doing that because all they care about is to be the best. And I think not every player is like that. And it's okay. It's fair, right? Not every player, honestly, if they're honest with themselves and they self-reflect, not every player is doing what it takes to be a world champion.
Yeah, of course not.
And they have to acknowledge that, right? You can't go out and say, I'm going to be the best player ever. And then you put in a quarter of the work of any other player. You're not really being true to yourself. But it's also not, I also don't believe in judgment, right? It's not a bad thing. If your goal is to be a stable pro player, you know, I want to do my job, it's fine, you know, do that. But if you truly want to be the best, there's a lot more that goes into it outside of the game than in the game.
Yeah.
I think perhaps from a mental standpoint, I think again, it would vary so much depending on whether, you do have that player who is like, okay, let's dig into an intervention right now in the off season. I want to be ready to go when we get into the split. Then okay, sure. But I guess you might have some of those players who do need a bit of off time. And I think it's definitely making sure that they have that if they need it, making sure they can switch off from the game for a bit, making sure they can, have time to go and see their friends, see their family, maybe go on holiday. So I think that is really important as well, and trying to build that in alongside all of, the other hard work too, for sure. But I think, having that time to switch off is definitely important. But it'll be different for everyone. Some people literally cannot switch off and will just want to keep going for it. And that's cool as well.
I love that you brought that up, because I think that's one of the things that at EG we consciously made a decision very early to do, was to build in rest times where, after MSI, we told the team while they were in MSI, we know this is going to be a grind. We know you're coming off of finals and of playoffs and all this stuff. And now you have to play this whole other tournament. We told them, after this is over, you guys are going to get a break. We're not going to make you start scrimming. We're going to give you as much time as you need for a week, basically. And then we're going to come back and start. We don't care if you don't practice at all before we start the first week of the season. We told them that if we start the split with 0 scrims, we don't care. We want you guys to feel 100%. We can win the split without winning the first week, And so because of that, they felt, even mentally coming into that, they were more prepared to rest, which is important. They didn't feel like, I'm already tired, I'm going to be more tired. And then even if we give them the rest, they're not really, resting. They're thinking about the season starting. So I think by setting expectations, building in rest periods, giving your players time off is super important, just long-term. You're not going to get much out of grinding 5 more games. Like the return on that is so minimal, but the downside is potentially catastrophic, right? If they burn out that week, now you have a problem that you have to deal with for 4 or 5 weeks longer. So I think more teams also need to factor in. Absolutely. Like, it's such a good point. Like, rest time is critical.
So, is there more rest time built in during, when you're in season?
This is the first split that LCS had an off week, and every single person I talked to loved it. Even at the casters, the staff that work the events were like, wow, this is the first time we've gotten a week off in the middle of a split. It's really nice. It's like a chance to catch up on everything, take a step back from everything, and then you come back refreshed for the last half, which is arguably the most important, because this is the most stressful part of the split now. The second half, going into playoffs and then going into worlds is the most intense.
Tough,
it's very, very mentally taxing. So I was really happy that Riot actually added a 1 week break.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I see we're about 3 minutes left, but it's a bit too short to answer a question. But there's one last question. Someone asked, can I still eat a tub of Ben and Jerry's and be good at esports?
My short answer is yes.
Of course.
I hope so, at least.
Yes. So resigning it to the person who asked that question. Yes, you can still be good at esports if you're eating Ben and Jerry's. And with that, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you to our wonderful speakers, Pablo, Jordan, and Laura. Let me just switch view to gallery. This is the last of our summer series, so thanks for joining in. If you've missed this or want to catch it later, it will be on the channel. But otherwise, you can catch our speakers on their Twitter handles, which we'll try and post somewhere.
Yeah.